Sorry. I keep on forgetting to do that, but that's me.
We've received apologies from Councillor Susan Jones and Councillor Erica Kirshner, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And anybody got any disclosures of any personal interest that they would like to make at this point in time?
Chair, I've got a few close friends who work for social services, and my son's partner has recently started as well. So there's no decisions to be made, and I have mentioned this to Liz before. So I assume I'm okay to participate. And if I find that something does come up that is prejudicial, I leave at that point. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Cheryl, I doubt if there's anything likely to come up in that respect as far as you're concerned. I wouldn't have thought. Anyway, I'm looking in that direction because I can see you on the screen there. That's the only reason why. It is a bit strange when you do this chairing of these. Okay. Thanks for that, Cheryl. Item 3 is the prohibition of whipped votes. I don't know if any got any declarations in terms of that. And item 4 were the minutes of the previous meeting. There were 2 sets of minutes, those for October and November, plus a letter to the cabinet members as well. I assume everybody's gone through those and had a look at them. In that case, I would ask members if they got any questions they want to raise or any matters that they are concerned about in terms of accuracy. I'm not seeing any yeses to that, so that looks fine. And I'll move on to item 5, public question time, and ask Liz if we've got any questions at this point in time.
No questions, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Liz.
Sorry, I'm late, Chair.
Sorry? Oh. Sorry, Kevin, I didn't see you coming in there.
Sorry,
I was looking at the door there, but you were over there. But there we go. Okay, thanks. Nice to see you. This is quite an extensive and quite a heavy report that we got in front of us, running to 100 and odd pages, 179, 180, something like that. And I must admit it was good reading. I really sat there for hours and read it. But obviously there's a lot in there, and we haven't got that much time in terms of going through it in detail. But we'll play that as we go along, I think. But obviously, if we can start with the Child and Family Services Improvement Programme and the performance monitoring, then we will do that. And I think there's obviously a bit of detail that we need to have there. Okay. Who's going to go on?
That's me.
Okay.
So I guess just for those who I've not met before, my name's Gemma Wiley. I'm the Principal Officer for Transformation. And I'm going to be talking to the Improvement Programme report, which is the first one in the agenda pack. And I think it starts on page 16. Yeah, 15, 16. So as you mentioned, it's quite an extensive report, and this covers a number of key areas of improvement for us across the service. But in order to just talk to some of the sort of most priority areas for today, I'm just going to be pulling out 3 or 4 areas to go through. But I'm happy to take questions as we go through or at the end on any number of the updates that are in the report. The reason why I'm pulling out these key ones is that some of the areas will come themselves to scrutiny panels in the future, or you may have heard previous scrutiny panels to some of the other areas. So the ones that I'll be talking about might not necessarily be coming your way in any other detail. So I'm pulling those out today, or they specifically relate to some of the pressures in the service at the moment. So the first to talk to relates to our therapeutic offer. So there's 2 key areas of work here that we're improving at the moment. The first is around the service that's offered to our children who our supported care planning teams or our locality social work teams work with. And then the second piece of work is in relation to the therapeutic support for our foster carers. So the first piece of work is this relates to the therapeutic service. So this sits within our family support part of the service, and to date has worked with a number of the complex locality teams, cases that we have in the locality teams. That piece of work, that service area, had a review back in 2021 where they looked at specifically what mattered to the children and young people that came to that area for support. And what we identified is that actually there's a need for us to be working therapeutically quite early on in the life span of some of the cases in the locality teams. But a lot of the time we focus our energy on working with a smaller cohort of young people in a higher, more intensive way. And what we learned through this review is that we wanted to get in earlier and work more preventatively with some of those young people. So this is the new mod. This is has helped us to create a new model for our therapeutic offer of support, which was hopefully going to help us to work on a more tiered approach to offer therapeutic services at an earlier stage. It's based on the therapeutic recovery model, and the idea behind it is that we build safety with those young people first, so that they feel safe enough to make the right relationships, be it with their networks or the professionals working with them. And once we've built good relationships through that safety network, we're able to support them in feeling resilient enough to reflect on some of the experiences that they've had in their childhood or their life to date. And then we offer a more intensive option of one-to-one or group therapy if and when that's needed. This is going to hopefully help us to work more holistically and respond earlier to what matters to children and young people, so that we don't have to wait until they need that intensive therapeutic offer. Of course, if they do want that or they do need that, then we can still provide that, and that would be part of that services support function as well. The second element of the therapeutic improvement is this relates to the work that's happening to support our foster carers. So we've had some Welsh Government funding here to support the creation of a therapeutic hub. This hub will help children and young people who are currently in residential care to move into a foster type or more home environment placement. A lot of the time we find that quite difficult because of the different needs of those young people. So the idea of the therapeutic hub is to work with the foster carers specifically, so that they can understand the therapeutic needs of the child, as well as all of the other needs that they would normally come into contact with through their experiences as foster carers for other children. So it'll work in a similar way to how I've previously described the therapeutic service will work. So in that tiered approach, understanding safety and relationships, and then moving into a more therapeutic way of working. But they'll work directly with foster carers, so that foster carers are able to understand and respond to the therapeutic needs of our children and young people as well. This will help them to move out of residential placement quicker and into more appropriate settings. This will include not only bespoke support for those carers, those foster carers, but also wraparound support, so that they can help the foster carers understand the young person's trauma nurture timeline. And what we mean by that is the type of trauma-informed practice that we can expect professionals in their lives to work with, and what that means for those young people. And this therapeutic hub will also provide additional development, training and upskilling, as well as targeted recruitment for foster carers to work with that type of young person in a therapeutic manner. And there's also an enhanced rate for those foster carers to work with those children as well. This is currently being funded by Welsh Government funding, and we're relying on that to continue. So we're hoping that we'll be able to take some of that work forwards, but that does rely on Welsh Government funding to support that. The next area of work to bring your attention to under the first priority, I should have said at the beginning, sorry, that the improvement programme is themed around 3 themes: prevention and early intervention, placements and workforce. So the first areas that I'm talking about are to do with our early intervention. I won't go into too much detail about the placement work because you heard that at the last scrutiny panel, but I'll be talking a little bit about workforce as well at the end. So the next piece of work under our prevention and early intervention is around our youth offer. So again, this area of work has we took a look at this in relation to what matters to children and young people. When we look at these types of areas and we review them in this way, we look at a number of factors that go into that service. Understanding what the needs are is the first thing that we look at, and we participate with young people who are in receipt of that piece of work at that time to understand what it is that they want from us. And then we follow that through a systemic look at, how we're built to provide that and what that means, and then how we can deliver that in the same or a different way to before. So this went through a review similar to that. And as a result, we've been able to sort of evidence really that we're able to have a more of an open outreach way of looking and working with our population of young people in Swansea to offer more open access youth provision. So the review finished in February of 2022, and through the process, the young people told us that they liked a blended approach, and that they liked to be able to access the open offer rather than you know, a more kind of tailored fixed offer that we had before. And we almost doubled, we have, since we've been offering this approach, we've almost doubled the number of young people we've been able to work with. And we've had a continual increase in the engagement that we've had in this way. This youth offer is also extended to our contextual missing, exploited and trafficked panel. So this is a particular look at extrafamilial harm. So this is work that we're doing with young people across Swansea to look at sort of safeguarding issues that are experienced outside of the family home. So some of that is around normal risk-taking behaviour that young people would normally and naturally experience, but we're able to take a more intelligent look at what's happening across Swansea and tailor our open access youth provision to support needs in that particular area, depending on what those needs are. So the CMIT panel have worked with over 5,000 young people in total over the last year or so. We've been able to provide more than 80 detached youth work sessions. So that means a session of work that's happening in the local community where the children or the young people are currently experiencing or spending their free time, rather than pulling them into different areas. We're able to go out to them. And we've had 182 group sessions which have been focusing specifically around safety for young people and how to experience and explore safety in a good way. We've trained a number of working professionals in the risks associated with extrafamilial harm. So that will include people like those that are providing transport and taxis across Swansea that our young people might be using. It includes things like where they access, you know, fast food in fast food establishments, or other areas that young people might spend their time. And a number of professionals from different organisations across Swansea attend our panel regularly, where we can talk about the extrafamilial harm happening in Swansea and our collective and joint approach to that. That's a particular area that we're proud of in Swansea, because we're one of the only areas in Wales that's taken this approach. We're having some support from the University of Bedfordshire around contextual safeguarding. So we've been working with some researchers in that area and being able to apply a different way of practicing and thinking about that in Swansea, which is working really well. And we're getting a lot of engagement from other local authorities about what it is that we're doing. So it's nice to be able to kind of share some of that. And then the last area of work to draw your attention to within this particular section is the Born into Care research. So there's been research done across the UK about the population of children who are unborn, and we get to know them before they're born, when their parents are expecting them. And a report has been published which includes sort of guidelines for local authorities to consider. So again, we're one of the only Welsh authorities that are adopting this first, and we're able to share some of our experiences across Wales and the UK about how that's going. We've been working quite closely again with researchers on this area of work, and the result of that has included the creation of a new kind of early assessment panel for children who present to us as unborn children. That will include multi-agency reflective discussions as early as 10 days after allocation. So we hope to get in and work with those families before they're 12 weeks pregnant. We're also using things like family network meetings to support the whole family in being able to safeguard those expectant parents and those unborn children to remain in their families when they're born. We're working with parents who maybe that isn't an option for, or we struggle to provide in safety well enough for that to be the case. We support them in those very early days about you know, how they can connect with those children and how they can build memories that will last, even though sometimes that means that for a period of time that child needs to become in the care of the local authority for whatever reason. This development work has meant that staff have been able to work with children prior to the 12-week scan, which I've already covered. So that means that we can get in really early and we have more time to work with these families. And we saw some case studies at our recent staff day, which showed some, you know, really excellent practice where we've been able to utilise this, and families have been able to remain together because we've had more time with them. We've been able to get in earlier, provide, you know, intense support where it's needed. And when those children have been born, they've been able to safely remain at home, which is a real, you know, a real success for us and for those families as well to remain together. So as I mentioned, I won't go into any detail of the placement sufficiency theme. There is a number of areas of work happening, but you will have heard at the last panel some of the detail around what we're doing with specific regards to our accommodation. So I'll move forwards to the workforce section. And I wanted to draw attention to the work that's been going on within our academy. So the academy is a newly formed team which sits within the portfolio, if you like, of our front door. And it is comprised of a number of newly qualified workers and experienced workers from across the service. The idea behind this area of work is that the academy will be able to take our kind of children in need of care and support, which tend to be those that need or that can have a faster, more intense time with us, and then don't need to escalate into some of our child protection or looked after processes. So we'll be able to work with these families in a more intense way, in a quicker way, to prevent those needs from escalating and to support them to remain safely at home without the need for more intensive support. As we're doing that, we're also developing our newly qualified staff. So when they start with us in Swansea as an authority, they'll start in the academy. So we get a lot of student social workers. They'll spend a period of time in the academy, and then when they qualify, they'll join us to work there. The idea is that we can build them and build their practice in the way that we would like our whole service to practice, thinking about the principles and the purposes that we work for, thinking about how we respond to what matters, and we work with the person first and the system second. Because of the nature of the syncs work, that allows us to have more focused time with families, so we're able to experience that, and our newly qualified workers are able to experience that in this particular area of work. And then once they become fully qualified and we feel like they're ready to move into other areas of the service, we can move them through the service into wherever the vacancies or the gaps might be at that time. So the concept of this has already had a direct involvement in supporting our current vacancies on the front line, because we've had a number of support workers that have been able to access this type of support early on in their careers, and we can convert them through to social workers as well. So we're supporting a number of support workers through the Open University route to become qualified staff through the academy. And then this is also feeding into our longer term vision around growing our own social workers in Swansea, so that when they come to work with us, we can teach them what social work is for us in Swansea. We can teach them our values and our principles. We can support them through the qualification. We can help them experience social work as a practice with less complex casework to start with, so that it can build their confidence. And then when it's right for us and them, we can move them through to other areas of the service. And we'll get new cohorts of those newly qualified workers every year as they come from university. So those are the sort of key areas I wanted to sort of put focus on today. I'm happy to take any questions. I've probably spoken a little bit quicker than I was planning, so I can cover another area if you'd like, but I hadn't planned to, so I'll stop there and take any questions.
Chair, could I come in quickly?
Sorry, and I owe you apologies.
Sorry, I don't know if you could hear me there. Could I come in quickly, Chair? Sorry, I don't know if the mics are on or off. Or, can you hear me?
Yes, you're fine.
Oh, sorry. There we are. Sorry. And thank you. I would just come in at the minute, but at the beginning, but Gemma beat me to it. So I just wanted to thank Gemma and Julie, and obviously all the staff, all the staff in Child and Family Services. Because I think as this report highlights, in spite of the challenging times, which I think we'll pick up in a minute, perhaps with the performance reporting, you know, the improvement work is going on, and they are developing and innovating in some quite interesting ways, as Gemma's picked up there. So we just wanted to highlight some of those key parts, really. And so yeah, that was all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Sorry, Louise, I was just saying before I turned the mic on that I apologise for not welcoming you into the meeting the first stage.
No, not at all. And I'm sorry, I'm having to attend online because I've got too many back-to-back things today. So.
No problem. I was going to say, Gemma, thank you very much for that. It was very comprehensive. And you talk about the academy and things of that nature. And that, again, is really innovative as far as social child and family services is concerned nationally and internationally, isn't it? And you continue to do this on a regular basis these days. So we're always seeing something new coming forward. And I'd like to thank you for that. Cheryl, have you got a question?
Yeah, just very briefly, I totally agree. The department's doing such good work, and I think that it's external influences and agencies that sometimes are a barrier to doing more work. So it's just looking at the neurodiversity work that's being done, and which is, you know, the department is doing a lot, but I'm just wondering what effect the backlog in diagnosis, because I do believe that Neath and Talbot, where the main centre is really bogged down and told that they can't take any more children, that they're not even dealing with the children that are on case at the moment. So, but obviously this is anecdotal to me, but so it would be interesting to hear what the department has to say and the barriers it finds itself with.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So yes, absolutely a valid point there, and we are aware that across Wales, I think it's fair to say that there are waiting lists for diagnostic assessments for both children and adults. Welsh Government have just recently agreed some additional funding for regional partnership board areas to help reduce waiting times. It's fair to say that will probably just have a small dent on those waiting times. But as a local partnership and a regional partnership, what we've committed to do, and this is one of those posts that will support that, is not wait for a diagnostic assessment, but to support families in the meantime. And certainly through our early help hub model, our worker is providing a lot of support to parents and carers in terms of understanding their child and how best to support them. And through the regional partnership board subgroups that we have, we're also looking at how we can do that as a collaborative. So we don't necessarily need to wait for that diagnostic assessment. But hopefully there'll be further funding from Welsh Government, which will mean we can make diagnostic assessment waiting times will reduce over time. But it is very high in number and there is no sign of it decreasing. But it's important that we offer family support in the meantime. And that's certainly what we're endeavouring to do in Swansea in partnership with others.
So do you get extra funding, Julie?
This not directly into Child and Family Services at the moment. So that's not to say that may not happen in the next tranche of funding, but at the moment the additional funding from Welsh Government, because it's focused on reducing waiting times around neurodiversity, that has mainly been directed through to the Health Board and those teams there. But what we're looking at is for hopefully the next tranche of funding is looking across the continuum of needs so that we can think about how that might work in education, in child and family services at a much earlier point, and similarly for adults, so that we actually have a range of support and services available. That's in the planning stages at the moment and dependent on funding becoming available.
Happy with that, Sharon? Or do you want to come back?
No, sorry, I just thought because of the new sort of system that's being put in to support families, that and I remember Julie did mention this in the last meeting, but it seems that because of those external factors, we are always on that race to try and put that early intervention in, you know, the academy, working with people. It's all very, it's excellent, isn't it? And it is putting that intervention in place early on. And I noticed that, you know, work being done with foster parents as well, on understanding the trauma and nurture. So, but it seems that it's always down to us, well, down to social services to be looking, to be innovative, and to be the proactive ones when every other agency seems to be reactive. And I don't know if I'm being unfair here, but that's the way it just seems. So sorry, but well done, everybody.
Okay, Cheryl. Thank you. Any other questions? In that case, I'll say, Gemma, thank you very much. It is interesting. Obviously, there is a lot of innovative work going on there. And it's nice to see Swansea continuing along that vein, to be honest. Okay, if we can move on to then the performance report. Are you going to take us through that, Julie?
Don't know if Louise wanted to come in first.
No, Judy's, I'm happy for Judy to go through it, but again, you know, just stressing that the challenging times that we are in, and again that we are performing to a really good level in spite of that. And again, just, you know, thanks to Judy and the teams for doing that. But Judy can take us through the detail.
Thanks, Louise. So I'll just take us through the highlights, and then there's similar to Gemma, if there's any follow-up or any queries that haven't been covered in the highlights, please do ask. So as Louise said, we're still able to evidence that we can meet our statutory duties and comply with those despite the ongoing shortage, and it is an acute shortage of social workers in our area social work teams, and that shows no sign of abatement at the moment. And we do have more complex demand coming through the front door, particularly in relation to adolescents, teenagers, where their parents and carers are struggling to manage their behaviour on their own, so they're coming to us for support. We do have more work, really good news, being passed to our early help teams, which is positive, but we do have a waiting list of families to be allocated pending appointment of new staff coming into post. I think as of the end of October, there were 219 families waiting for support, mainly in our early years early help team. So that team provides support around play, but also speech and language development. But to make sure that families, hopefully to prevent any escalation of needs, that we do have regular oversight of that with the early help manager, and some support from our learning and innovation team to try and prevent that escalation of need. We didn't have the usual dip in contacts in October that we would normally expect to see. So there was a slight increase in that month. And we're not quite sure why that is, so we continue to look into that every week through our weekly meetings, looking at referrals that are coming in. But another good news is that we have completed more wellbeing assessments, and more family plans were completed during the month. Our child missing exploited traffic team that Gemma mentioned in the improvement plan, we continue to be busy, particularly, and that's primarily responding to and supporting other local authority looked after children who are living in either residential homes or foster carers in Swansea, and they go missing or are pulled into criminal activities. So the legislation requires the host local authority to undertake the child protection investigation in that regard. But what we also do as a local authority is follow up with the say the residential home staff to help them and to be sure that they know how to keep those children safe from a contextual point of view, because it's a huge draw on not just social services time but education time and police time in relation to supporting those children that are living in Swansea at the moment. New this month, we've included information about carers assessments. That's where we may be supporting, well, we would be supporting the children, and we make an offer to the parents or carers if they'd like an assessment. So we've been more proactive in that offer now, particularly through our single point of contact. We have a dedicated team in there that sits as part of the Social Work Academy. And so we're now able to pull that information off the system and know how many carers have requested an assessment. And that's really good groundwork for our newly qualified social workers to get involved in that. We had a significant increase in strategy discussions initiated by the area social work teams. And what that would tell us is that there's some worries appearing there around the safety of those children in those teams. And so we're responding quickly to look at that in terms of what may be lying behind that. And I think it is linked to those worries about the level of complexity that's been evidenced with children being out of school for 2 years and then really perhaps struggling with understanding their life as it is now in the world. Now the doors are open, so to speak. So we saw 50% of those progress into an initial child protection conference, which is probably higher than we've seen for some time. However, although our registrations have increased to 200, pleasingly with no children being removed at first review, because that's normally quite a negative indicator, because you'd wonder why they were put on the register in the first place. That would then make you question thresholds around decision making. And we've pleasingly had a significant improvement in core groups, which are held in between conferences to check the progress of the plan. Those core groups are being held on time. But we are still within a very healthy range of numbers on the register. So they're not too high and not too low, which is good for Swansea when we look back at where we were when we were in special measures. So that's something we always keep an eye on. In relation to children where we're looking to try and prevent them coming into our care and supporting families for them to stay at home, the information around that is contained in the public law outline section. So where we were in that phase of assessing in the public law outline, 4 out of the 7 children we issued proceedings for. But the other children, when we went before, and then the children that we went before court of those children, they all concluded with orders that kept the children living at home or with their family or on a pathway to adoption. So that's good and healthy for those children. They stayed within a family unit or were on a pathway to adoption. We had a very, very slight reduction in children looked after, 479. And some of that could be because we had a high number that turned 18, so 6 last month in October, that's the month before now. We have one young person that continues to live in a home that's operating without registration. We are well on the way to registering that home now with Care Inspectorate Wales. We had no young people presented as homeless, although 7 remained living in emergency accommodation. That's normally bed and breakfast or a hotel, due to lack of supported accommodation for them to move on into. Vacancy rates in the social work teams are between 35 and 48%. You'll see at the end of the report, we included a breakdown in relation to something that you asked for at the last meeting, vacancy rates, agency rates, and also I think absence rates. And we are now starting to challenge across Wales as heads of service, other local authorities who are accepting permanent social workers moving into agency, because that's not a healthy position to be in. So that's something that we're trying to implement across Wales, across 22 local authorities, holding our line on agency rates, but also people converting from permanent to agency posts. The other thing that is in here is you'll notice around case supervision and support has dropped slightly in terms of that which is formally recorded. With the challenges we have around resource, then we're doing well on visits. We've improved on visits, we've improved on assessments, we've improved on core groups, but something has to give, so to speak. So formal case supervision is not being recorded as well on the system at the moment. However, because we're now back working in the office, there's a lot of informal discussions happening and impromptu conversations, and people are on hand to offer support directly. The other thing I wanted to point out, which is, again, is something that you asked for last time, was around numbers of children that are looked after by us that aren't living in Wales. And that is included in the report this time. I'm just paging down to it now because I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. There are slightly more than we would like, it's probably fair to say. Just a moment. So we have so of the 479 children, there are 112 children that don't live in Swansea. The 112, sorry, that live in a neighbouring authority, that's either Neathport, Talbot or Carmarthenshire. 52 are living in another local authority in Wales, and 20 are living in England. And there's one of those 20, one of those is living in Scotland, but they're living with a kinship carer. So that's living with a family member.
Those figures are beginning to keep up a little bit, aren't they?
In terms of, yes, they are. They are. And one of the reasons for that is the lack of suitable placements in not just Swansea, but in Wales. And part of that is because of the introduction of Welsh Government's Eliminate programme. So some providers have become a little bit nervous about their future in Wales. So they're making decisions about availability of placements for Welsh children in Wales, or deciding to take their business out of Wales and perhaps only operate in other parts of the UK. So that's some of that is around those challenges.
Okay.
So those are the main highlights that I wanted to pull out for today's meeting, Chair. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
We're not going to go through these one by one, are we?
It's a very extensive report.
It is a very extensive
and we continue to grow. So I think it's important that you can see the whole service from prevention, early intervention, right through to adoption, and get a feel for all of the activity that's happening across child and family services.
Cheryl, you wanted to come in?
Just a quick question. It's regarding when you look at the graphs and the comments. There's quite a number of items where it says report to be developed, and I wondered whether that is significant, and should we be flagging it up?
So the reason why it's report to be developed is when we moved over to the new client information system, WICIS, then we have to develop that system to be able to run those reports off. Also, we've had a bigger ask of what we want from the system. So some of it is because we're having to get the new system to do what the old system did, and some of it is because we want more information from the system. It's a bit of both, really, and Damien might want to come in because he's got responsibility for helping us develop WICIS, but there are some challenges to how we can develop WICIS, aren't there, Damien?
That one, there we go. Yeah, there are challenges. I think Julie's right. I think we looked at prioritizing sort of our core information and our core data. So the things that we're saying need to be developed are, I suppose, new asks. One of the big challenges that we've got is validating the data without getting really, really boring and really technical. We want to make sure that when we are reporting the information, the data, that it is right, that it's correct, that it reflects where we are. Well, that takes time. So it's not just the physicality of producing the reports, it's the time taking then to validate and go back over and making sure that when they do make it to the final report, that we know that they're right, we know that they're backed up sort of with what's happening, they're a true reflection. So and then, yeah, there have been some challenges within WCS, just in terms of how we get data back out of it is not as straightforward as we'd initially thought that it would be. And that's taking quite a bit of work. But I think that, I suppose that for me, it's back to the recognition at the moment that the volume of information that we are now able to do, which I think hopefully everybody here will agree is far greater than what we were doing previously, which gives me confidence really that actually we will be able to get the rest of that data together. And actually, if there is further data that we do want out of the system that we think is meaningful, that we should be able to do that as well. But you have to bear with us because it just takes a little bit of time for it to go through that kind of washing machine process.
Well, it is vitally important that you get the data right, because you're going to be making decisions on that data. If you've got wrong data, you're going to get wrong decisions. So obviously, I totally understand what you said, and it needs to be sorted out. It needs to be, you need to be satisfied that that data is right, and it does take time, I think, to do that, and I understand that. But obviously, the report is developing and has developed very significantly over the last few months. I'm going to ask for another slight change. I asked for one last time. I'm going to ask for another one this time, where you got October and September, or this month and last month. You got them the wrong way around to my mind, because I looked from left to right. Yeah. Sorry, but that's just me niggling on a little point. I did have a few questions, really. Perhaps for one I should know, very simple question. I was going to ask, what is a section 47 inquiry as opposed to
So that's a child, it's a child protection inquiry. So it's section 47 is a part of the act that it sits within. So
Sorry.
what it involves, do you mean?
Sorry, I understand, I think.
Okay, sorry.
In that sense, but I've not seen the term inquiry before. I'd always understood section 47 meant that it was going to the courts, basically.
No, so section 47 would be if we've had a referral in and we suspect that a child may be at risk of significant harm, we'd have a strategy discussion to gather more information, or strategy meeting to gather more information, and then through that meeting with the police, social services and health, normally there may be other partners there. Then if we think that then requires investigation, that could be us and the police, or just us, or just the police. And then from that would follow perhaps, sometimes we might need to go straight into court depending on the severity of the incident, but that's quite rare. We would normally then do that investigation, and then we decide whether we need to go to an initial child protection conference or not. And then if things don't improve, then you might then go into public law outline and do an assessment, but have legal gateway meetings to say, well, do we need to go to court to issue care proceedings? So we hope by working with the family earlier on, we don't need to get to that point. But there are a lot of steps in the statutory process before to get to that point.
So the inquiry is the process overall then?
So just to come, shall I come in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the section 47 is the investigation bit. So if we suspect a child may be at risk of significant harm, the way that we do that is under section 47. So that is sort of sets out and dictates then the processes that all agencies need to follow in order to establish whether or not we suspect that child is at risk of significant harm. So that's just the mechanism. It's just a terminology, I suppose, of how we do that, and it sets the sort of framework for what we need to look at.
Okay, thank you.
It's okay.
On page 36, there were a number of cases awaiting, or the number of cases awaiting allocation seem to be rising. Yeah. Page 9 of the report. I was wondering if that's a concern to you as well.
That's primarily, I think, the cases that are waiting to be allocated in our family support. So in which page? Sorry, I'm lost a bit. Which page we're on? Which page is it in the agenda pack?
37.
37.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, 36.
36.
36. Number 37 had a similar question in terms of the trends in terms of caseload.
Oh, okay. It's the ones in early help, and where we're waiting for staff to come into post.
Because the next report, basically, which on page 37, is showing an increase in caseload trends as well. So
yeah, so we've got more work coming in, and until we have staff that come into post to allocate them to, that's why there's been an increase in the number of cases waiting to be allocated.
I think that'll probably take me to page 41 in that case. And where you're saying there what we're worried about, item 3, at the bottom there says HR processes continue to create a block to fill in posts quickly. Anything we can do to help you in that respect?
So we are in discussion with our corporate colleagues, Chair. It's probably fair to say that the combination of the amount of churn that there's been within the council in terms of number of posts, combined with the capacity issues linked to implementation of Oracle Fusion, did lead to a backlog in the service centre. We anticipated that might cause a problem in our directorate, so we established some additional resource to support the service centre to concentrate on our directorate's posts. That didn't work as well as we'd hoped, but subsequently the council has overall established a vacancy freeze, so the work in the service centre has decreased. We had some assurance this week that all of the backlog has been caught up on, and the resource to prioritise our most urgent posts, and clearly the vast majority of children's services posts will be our most urgent posts, that they will be on top of that work and making sure that that all of the bureaucracy is speedily gone through. So we would hope to see some improvement in that over the next few weeks, and we'll be monitoring that closely to make sure it does play out in that way.
Sure, it obviously doesn't help you, does it? HR, I would say deliberately delaying the process, but causing the process to be delayed is a better way of putting it, possibly. But if there's anything we can do to help you on that, just let us know in terms of writing letters or anything of that nature. And basically, I think at the end of the report, you've got the vacancy numbers, haven't you? On pages 71 and 72. Looking at something like vacancies, somewhere about 159 at this point in time.
In total across the service, yeah.
And 12 agency staff at the moment covering 179 positions. Not quite like that, I'm sure, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because I got to be careful what I say here, because certainly we had a lot of concerns about agency staff when we were in special measures, and I think that's something we might touch upon in the next report anyway, in terms of safeguarding and what's happening within Bridgend at the moment. Because they look to be sadly going into the same sort of situation as we were in a fair number of years ago. And we're coming back to this situation of staff shortages again, possibly, and agency staff who don't fully understand situations. And I think it was always a concern for us once we were coming out of that process. We were seeing the numbers of agency staff reducing and getting down to zero, which we did at one stage, I think, for a fair period of time. And we were always something that we were monitoring at that point in time quite closely, and to see it started to creep up, and with the vacancies you've got, is obviously a concern. But I'm sure you've got those concerns as well. You want to come in, Louise?
Yeah, just briefly, I just wanted to reiterate, you know, I think it's important to see this part of the workforce, this part of the report with the vacancies hand in hand with the first report that we did on performance, and in terms of the strategies that are being taken to, you know, things like the academy that Gemma highlighted to try and sort of help with those vacancies. Obviously, it's not a quick fix, but hopefully it will create that, you know, that homegrown workforce and that longevity that we need in the longer term, that is much more stable, and we won't need to have that kind of that sort of agency backup as you've highlighted.
But certainly from what I can see, what you're talking about, the virtual college, I suppose, you're setting up at the end of the day, and the department is obviously making a major effort in respect to that, isn't it? Yeah, to get people in early. Okay, fine. I don't know if anybody else has got any questions on this part of the agenda, which is the improvement program and performance monitoring. If not, then I'll move on to item 7, which is updates from the Regional Safeguarding Board. And, are you going to take us through that, David?
Yeah. I'll pick this up, Chair. So I'm one of the chairs of the Safeguarding Board, hence, you know, picking up this item. What you have in front of you is a copy of the annual report and annual plan that the board is required to produce. I'm not going to try to go through what are quite lengthy documents in a huge amount of detail. I'll pick out just a reminder really of how the board operates, you know, so the basic infrastructure of the board and the various streams of work that we rely on. First thing I'd say is a bit like everything else, the board in the last year and the year preceding that refocused its efforts on oversight across the partnership of how we were doing the best that we could to mitigate the safeguarding implications of COVID. So the priorities of the board were reshaped around resilience, really, across our safeguarding work, whilst managing the restrictions and the impacts on our population of COVID. You would expect that to be the case. You've heard us talk about that for every other area of our work. Well, the same applied to safeguarding oversight in the region via the board. Clearly, as we now are in our recovery from that, you know, like everything else, the board is refocusing on looking forward and learning lessons from that COVID experience, and then the oversight of how the partnership and the constituent statutory bodies that make up the partnership, how they're then recovering, or how we're recovering our arrangements individually and collectively. But the report you've got in front of you is still framed in its retrospective look, so it's looking back at the oversight that took place during that COVID period. There's 4 main subgroups that report to the board. So there's a subgroup that focuses on oversight of performance, a bit like this scrutiny committee, but it's looking at 2 things, I suppose: the performance information that the partners gather within their own organisations, and then how, when you bring all of that information together, you get a more collective oversight of how the system is working. So whilst in this board, you're focused understandably on what's happening within Swansea Children's Services. At the Safeguarding Board, we're interested in what's happening in Swansea Children's Services, what's happening in Leith Talbot Children's Services, what's happening in the police, what's happening within the Health Board, and then some of the other partners, probation, third sector, etc. So that particular group brings all of that information together. It also carries out some dedicated audit activity in areas where the collective performance information suggests that as a board we might take particular interest. So in recent times there's been a focus on things like child exploitation, and there'd be a focus on things like what are we doing around contextual safeguarding, and it'll be themes that are then picked up around collective audit activity. Next subgroup that I'd reference is the practice review oversight. So this, in the past, we would have known those as serious case review activity. It's not called serious case review activity anymore. It's called child practice review and adult practice review activity. So there are criteria that the board needs to consider whenever there is particular concerns about either children or adult safeguarding practice. They're reasonably stringent criteria as to whether the board should commission and undertake a practice review. So you'll see from the report there aren't a huge number, but there are probably more than there would have been back in the days where it was all focused on serious case review and predominantly focused on the most serious instance of harms, whereas now the approach is to be a bit more strengths based, so to look, cast the net a bit wider, but for the process that you go through is very focused on constructive strengths based learning, both around the things that did work well, but also what were some of the challenges and how might we change things. So it's a slightly different approach to the one we might have experienced in the past that always seemed very deficit approach, and it's focused more on bringing together the professionals and hopefully getting some insight from either individuals or family members and carers, etc., for focused on learning from their experience rather than just analysis of case records, etc. That analysis of case records still takes place, but there's much more of a focus on getting professionals and hopefully family members together to report on their experience of what worked well and what didn't work so well, and to derive the learning themselves, and have more, I suppose, of an ownership of that learning and how we might make improvements. So a bit of a different approach. The things that I look out for in for feedback from that group is assurance that whilst you might not want lots of child practice reviews or adult practice reviews to be taking place because we've become a bit overwhelmed, you actually want quite a lot of referrals into the group for consideration of, does this meet the criteria? Should we be carrying out a full review? Should we be doing something else, even if it doesn't meet the criteria? And that might be some audit activity or an individual agency do a management review, etc. So what we look out for there is there lots of, our organisations sensitive to there might be learning in this situation, therefore refer it through to that subgroup, and then the subgroup needs to apply the criteria. And that seems to be the case. Certainly when we've looked at that as a board, all of the agencies, including the council, are good at spotting this might be something that we ought to be considering in the Regional Safeguarding Board, but it's not leading to an overwhelming number of reviews that might be difficult to manage, but also might suggest that we've got significant challenges in the way safeguarding is working, and that doesn't appear to be the case in this region, touch wood, but we're always, I suppose, humble and acutely sensitive to don't take your eye off the ball in this sort of area. So that's that subgroup. Next subgroup is a group that looks at our policies and our practice within the region. So that's a slightly drier subgroup, but nevertheless a very important group, making sure that we keep our policy and practice up to date. So we're updating things in terms of new learning. That might be learning that comes out of practice reviews, etc. But that might also be national policy drive, etc. And changes in that arena. So that's a group that does a lot of the background. I'm trying not to describe this as boring. It's not boring, but I'm glad that I'm not on that group. It's really important that that work's being undertaken, but I suppose it's a bit drier. I suppose an accurate way of describing it. And the final subgroup is the learning and development activity, the training, staff training across. That's not just well, it's predominantly not training that necessarily takes place within organisations, but the multi-agency training. But again, you need to have sight of, as a board, is the right level of training, be it taking place in organisations as well. So it's a combination of monitoring, is training activity and professional development happening around safeguarding within key agencies, but then also facilitating and delivering multi-agency training as well to make sure our staff across the partnership are all supported to be the best that they can be in terms of their professional development. Again, lots of the learning that comes out of the practice reviews or any audit activity is then taken forward by the training subgroup in developing our training plans for the partnership for coming years, etc. And the final bit that's highlighted in the report that I would acknowledge is that one of our own criticisms of ourselves, I think, as a board in recent years is not enough of our work is informed by actually the people that rely on our our safeguarding arrangements, our processes, our services, etc. So first and foremost for that would be young people, children and young people, having an opportunity to shape the agenda of the board, but also parents and carers. And there's been a couple of initiatives even during this period of COVID that we are proud of. So the establishment of junior safeguarding board arrangements, and really whilst we're calling that a junior safeguarding board, it's really about the engagement activity that's taking place with children and young people, allowing them to take forward and supporting them to take forward some of the safeguarding work that they are interested in. And that might be certainly the most recent thing I've seen is some work that young people wanted to take forward around children with disabilities and communication difficulties, wanting to do some work to improve how health services, particularly emergency health services, are cognizant of and able to communicate with those young people when they're responding to those sorts of medical emergencies. Because what the young people were describing was, it's an absolutely terrifying experience when somebody turns up, isn't able to communicate with us, we don't know what's going on. So some bespoke work around that, which was exciting and innovative and good to see. So that's one of the pieces of work that's taken forward. But I suppose the big thing is about children and young people shaping the things that the board think would be important, because we tend to be dominated by our own professional adult ideas of what are the most important safeguarding issues in the region. So this is starting to help change our thinking. And then the other bit I'd flag that the board are connected to, though shouldn't be directly responsible for, but we're really interested in, is the work that's been done around establishing parental advocacy arrangements or support delivered by or supported by parents who have actually got direct experience of being caught up in our processes. So I'm not sure whether you have heard about it in the board. In this board, you may have done the PAN work, and again, that's an example of us starting to accept as a board that actually the experts in terms of shaping how we might improve and be the best we can be, both as systems, organisations and individuals, is going to come from directly listening to the recipients of those services and the people that are caught up in those systems. So we're starting to see evidence of that as well. So that's a pleasing sign of development of the maturity of the board from my perspective. And I'll stop there, Chair.
Sorry, Cheryl, I was saying your hand is up. Do you want to come in?
Just on what Dave was just talking about now, about the service being informed by the people who have used that particular service and maybe understanding why people aren't able to come forward. You know, I think it's a little bit sort of similar where you've had an elderly family member in a care home and sometimes you don't want to say anything for fear of recrimination. You might want to put a brave face on things. When your situation improves, you've got the trauma of the issues that have gone on and you don't really want to have to remind yourself of those. So I think it's possibly working with the parents, carers and those people involved in teasing out why they don't want to be involved. And I think that would be really, really sort of advantageous to them. And I'm quite happy to take that up as my own experience as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Cheryl, I completely agree with you. I think that's probably the beauty and opportunity of the PAN network. So individuals who seek support from that network know that actually the people that they're talking to are people who have had direct experience themselves. So that trust and reassurance and trying to overcome that anxiety around, if I talk about some of this stuff, or if I was to be challenging or suggest that things could be better, you know, if you're talking to a professional, I would agree. You know, the risk is that I mean, hopefully we wouldn't operate like this, but I absolutely understand that fear and that anxiety around, no, I just want to comply because I don't want to be perceived to be, you know, disagreeing or to, you know, to be accused of not taking seriously the concerns of professionals, etc. So I think that's always a difficult dynamic for us to manage, particularly when we are intervening on a statutory basis where, you know, the worst outcome for a family would be that, you know, decisions will be made where, you know, that they're not able to deliver safety for their children, etc. So I think that's the strength of this model, where you've got parents and carers who have had experience of being involved in the system themselves, reaching out to and supporting parents who are currently caught up in the system and trying to support you know, advocacy on their behalf. So that's part of the logic for taking this approach. Yeah.
Hazel, did you want to come back in or come in?
I would like for a bit of advice, really, on a personal level. Before my husband died, he was in hospital and he used to tell me every time, don't complain, don't tell anybody off, don't ask any questions, because he said that the staff took it out on him after I'd gone home. Now my son's in care for Alzheimer's, and I've got no intention, I don't want to complain about anything, but should we as family look out for quietly, just for us to satisfy ourselves that everything's all right?
So probably a conversation I'd encourage us to have outside of this committee, but both because it's a public committee and I wouldn't want to be talking about your circumstances, but also it's the Children's Performance Committee, and I've got the impression that we're talking about adults.
Adults, I
So,
thought you said
yeah,
adults.
maybe come back to me outside of this meeting and I'll happily give you some advice.
Yeah.
Okay, if I do go back to where we were when we went in special measures, at that time the Swansea Safeguarding Board was not seen as being very effective, and I think it was Chief Executive Jack Straw and Mark Mathias with the police who got a real grip on it and really turned that round in that sense. And one of the important things they thought was that the people who were then at the head of our safeguarding board had the authority to ensure that their staff
Then we go
did
down
what was
here.
coming out of that. Yeah. Consequently, I think we were all a little bit disappointed when Swansea Safeguarding Board disappeared and it became West Glamorgan. And I think at that time, Jack Straw set up the Public Protection Committee to replace it. Really what I'm coming back to, I think, obviously we're now working again on a regional basis. Are you really happy that it's working as well as it should?
So a couple of things, I suppose. Yeah, so it is all, the reality is it is a bit more challenging for us if we work on a regional basis rather than have direct control in the way that we did have when we ran our own safeguarding board. So there are additional challenges and complexities, but it also provides some greater opportunities. I think I don't think we've realised all the opportunities we can. And we still have some of those, challenges that come up from time to time. Nevertheless, we've got good history now in our region around and strength around open, collaborative working that I think still leaves us in good stead. So it doesn't mean that it works perfectly, but what I would be confident about is when we don't think that we're working as well as we could together, that we're open and honest about that, and therefore, are able to constructively resolve things. So that'd be my overall take on the regional arrangements. Not perfect, but we're now good at being challenging of one another.
Are you saying as a scrutiny board we should be reasonably satisfied then, David, is it?
Overall, I would say yes. But I suppose the additional bit you referenced there, Chair, we've lost something locally, and we know that in the past that the previous chief exec established a public protection oversight arrangement because, as you rightly say, just to make sure that we didn't lose oversight locally. Well, subsequent to that, we have established the corporate safeguarding board within the council, which does also reflect on some of our partnership work as well as looking at our local arrangements. And that corporate safeguarding board, whilst it doesn't report here, it does report into Scrutiny Programme Committee on an annual basis. So I think probably the combination of we've still got local oversight, we've still got good local board arrangements, albeit looking from a corporate safeguarding perspective, it does bear on, it considers how well we work as a corporate body with our partners as well around the safeguarding agenda. I know you haven't received it here, but that reassurance about how those arrangements work still goes through to, has scrutiny oversight on an annual basis at least. And we've had good, Welsh Audit Office have been in and scrutinised that. We've had good feedback about how well that arrangement works. So the combination of those things, and then if you layered that with, the extent to which Audit Committee take an interest in safeguarding as well, the fact that we get, we've had a very positive Estin inspection that reflected well on safeguarding. You've had good feedback on CIW reports on safeguarding. I think if you looked in the entirety, I'd say we would, at this point, take good level of reassurance still. But the things that you do focus on in this group, like, for instance, the questioning around, what are the impacts around shortage of social workers, the creeping up of reliance on agency workers, that scrutiny of those key things that we know if we don't manage to turn that round, eventually will cause issues for us. I think that's the right area for this board to be focusing.
Okay, thank you, David. The only thing I would say about that report, other than that, executive summary would be nice.
Yeah, I don't write the report, but I'll take that back to the business unit, Chair.
But there was a lot of reading there. Anybody got any other questions for David? No? Not seeing any hands. In that case, if I may, I will move off on to item 8, which is the Safeguarding Quality Unit Annual Report. And I guess, Damien, you're going to take us through that, aren't you?
It'll be me, yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chair. So I'll just give some summaries of within the main report. So just to remind people that obviously this is the annual report from April 21 to March 22. So this is that period of time, and it's providing an overview of the team and its core duties, which is child protection conferencing, looked after children reviews and adoption reviews. But what we've also added in are the views of children and young people who are using the service. So just to remind people that the team focuses their work on what matters to each individual child and young person, whilst valuing the importance of building long-term relationships with them. Okay. So the report provides an opportunity to highlight areas of good practice, areas for improvement, and emerging themes and trends to help us focus on the future service development in the coming 12 months. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the team profile that's there. What I also thought would be helpful is just to sort of around the role of the independent reviewing officer. So just to remind people that the role of the IRO is to monitor, that is to keep an overview of the child's case, not just at formal review meetings, but in between review meetings as well. However, the IRO does not make final decisions about a child's case. That's for the social worker and the manager. The decisions made during a review are, in fact, recommendations to the local authority. The IRO will want to develop a good working relationship with the child's social worker and in some circumstances be able to advise the social worker. The IRO has a duty to look at how the child has been looked after and how the care plan is progressing, but the IRO does not make care planning decisions. The care plan is ultimately the decision for the social worker and the right representatives from the local authority. And that is defined within the practice standards in Part 6 of the Care and Support Plans of 2015. So service overview. So what during this period have we done that's working well? Well, the number of looking after children has reduced during this time. We've had 3 new members of staff being recruited to vacant posts, and our staff retention in this area remained good. The Safe Looked After Children Operational Group developed themes for how we can ensure that we're progressing children's care plans to ensure that they achieve permanence as quickly as possible. A great number of children have exited care compared to those who have entered care. A high proportion of looked after children chaired, attended, participated in their reviews, certainly a higher proportion than in previous years. During the year, there's been a reduction of the number of children on the child protection register. More children have been deregistered compared to the number registered. All reviews and child protection conferences during this time were all held within timescales. Statutory timescales are set out. And we did a refurbishment on Cocket House, so that's been revamped.
Has that been used as a contact centre? No, is it?
No, it's used. So it is used as where we hold child protection conferences.
Okay.
So we listen to families and their views about wanting to return to face-to-face meetings. So in a way of ensuring that the environment that we were bringing families back into was the best that it could be and appropriate, we invested and developed Cocket House. So that's been completely refurbished so that it's now also got access to other bits of technology, like some of these smart screens and various other things then, so that if families do want to join remotely, we can do that. If other people need to join remotely, we can do that, but we can still have face-to-face, and we can do hybrid versions of that. So things then that we're worried about, or things that we need to draw attention to in terms of our thinking going forward. More looked after children than those subject to child protection register. Sorry, they're more looked after. This is phrased really badly in there. Basically, we're concerned that while we're offering young people advocacy and we're making an active offer for advocacy, the take up from young people themselves is still very low. So we need to understand that more. Independent reviewing officers have found it can be harder to engage with younger children on teams during this period of time. In fact, they found it harder to engage with children and young people as well, but particularly younger children was really challenging. Some independent reviewers found that young people find it easier not to answer calls or disengage. So again, because at that period of time, some of the proactive work was about contacting via media platforms rather than going knocking on a door and seeing people. Actually, what we found is that young people, sometimes who may need to be more encouraged to engage, were just sort of point blank refusing to sort of engage through the technology that we were using at the time. And then whilst IT has allowed us to continue and operating child protection conferences and looked after reviews during the pandemic and sort of the post-pandemic restrictions, there have always been issues around that some families haven't had access to all the right technology at the right times, but also issues around Wi-Fi, people's abilities to use Wi-Fi and broadband, which is at times challenging. The other bit is that actually doing things online took longer. So child protection conferences were taking a lot longer, which again, they're not necessarily the most pleasant meetings that you want families to sit in. You want them to be there. You want them to be to the point. You want to be, going through everything. But what you don't want to do is make people sit in them for longer than is absolutely necessary. And what we're finding is that virtually they were just taking longer. So what do we need to do? As I've said, we need to understand a little bit more about the advocacy offer. So we're doing some work at the moment around speaking to young people about what would make that better. What are the barriers? Helping us understand so that we can sort of think about what we could put in place and what we can change to increase that offer or that take up, I should say. Contribute to care and support plans, task and finish group to allow our plans to be more child focused. So one of the other things that we were looking at is that while our plans are there, they're very professional speak. I want them to be as meaningful for the young people that are actually coming and engaging in those processes. So we wanted to increase our engagement with looked after children. Again, more opportunities to look at feedback from young people around both the service and also their care experiences. Revise the information packs that are going out to families for child protection conferences and looked after children. Undertake a system review within the service quality unit to make sure that we're doing the right work at the right time and how well we're doing it. And start and develop tools and processes to gain feedback from families in relation to their experiences in child protection conferences. Because again, we focus quite a lot around looked after children. We spent a lot of time thinking about how we get feedback from looked after children. What we haven't really done a huge amount of work on is getting feedback for those children that are subject to child protection processes. So one of the things that we want to look at is how do we get their feedback and how do we sort of use that to inform what we're doing next. So that's the broad overview. Some of the data then that you can see that's in the report is you can see then the population of our looked after children has dropped from April 21 from 535 to March 22 to 488. So a general downward decline in the number of children needing to be looked after by local authority. Again, I'm not going to go through all the breakdowns, all the data. It's all sort of there. You can see the number of meetings that are held and the engagement that we do, number of reviews that have taken place during that period of time. As you can see, 1,162 looked after reviews took place that year. And then the other bit that I wanted to draw attention to was just some of the feedback that young people have said. So within the report, it says, I felt it was nice that the IRO told me what was happening. They would ask me what I thought and take into consideration my views before and in the review. So this is feedback from children and young people. I like to have a catch up. It's nice to have everybody who is important to me in the meetings. The IRO is special. She comes to all of our meetings and supportive. It's someone we can talk to if we have problems. She's there for us. I think so. I have been at every meeting. I know I can ring my IRO myself if I need any problem solving. And then the other bit then, so that's the looking after children and some feedback from looking after children. And then the other one then feeds into some of what you were hearing in the performance report that Julie presented was around the child protection registration. So again, what we can see is that our child protection numbers in April 21 were 253 and they had dropped to 199 during that period of time. And we'd seen a sort of trend, a downward trend of the number of children needing to be on a child protection register. During that period of time, as already noted, we made sure that and completed all reviews in timescales.
What's the optimum figure for that then?
Well, it's a really difficult. I suppose that what we look at is what the population needs assessment would be based on sort of the local demographic. We look at national trends, and then we think about what the kind of based on the population needs, what we think would be about right. So somewhere between about 180 and 250. in terms of when we've looked at the data would be where we would expect our population of children needing to be on child protection would be, but it can fluctuate and it's not an exact science. I mean, ultimately, it's, you know, it's just making sure that we're meeting the need, but that would tell us, looking at that data, that we are where we would expect to be.
Because you're not getting a lot of re-registrations within 12 months now, are you?
No, so the other bit then that's really positive, so is that there has been a reduction in the number of re-registrations through this time. So one of the things that Julie touched on earlier was that we've introduced a weekly review of our safeguarding decision making. So there is a weekly multi-agency review around children who go through any form of child protection process. So when they're going through the Section 47 child protection part of the process through that early stage, they review that. They're also reviewing children whose names come off at the first review. And then they're also looking at a smaller sample of children whose names come off the register, so that we can pick up learning and share that with the service. So one of the really positive things, I think, is that we've been able to help our practitioners understand and think through those timely exits and escalations in the safeguarding and child protection kind of system.
Did I see there was a reduction in the number of children coming off on the first review?
Yes, there is.
That's positive as well, isn't it?
It is. So yes, we want those to be low numbers,
Yes.
not high numbers. There we go, Chair. I mean, there are some quotes there as well from children on child protection register as well. I won't go through those now. They're in the report there for those that are interested to read, but I'm happy to take any other questions.
Anybody have any questions? I'm looking at Cheryl or Hazelnut. Just a matter of interest, when you're looking at your reviews and pathway plan reviews, does that include education plan reviews as well?
So personal education plans are slightly different. So so there is statutory guidance of when a personal education plan has to be completed, but they aren't the same as that data and that information.
But I'm just wondering whether they are part of what would be the pathway plan.
So the pathway plan would be for over 16, so they are for our 16 plus. So the personal education plan would be considered at all of the looked after reviews.
So I know show my ignorance again, don't I?
Not at all. They're perfectly valid questions. So the education plan's content would be discussed in each looked after review. If that child was still, or the young person was still in education, then their personal education plan post 16 would be considered then in that pathway plan.
So that would be important for the IROs to be doing that. That's
correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Cheryl.
I just wanted, Chair, I was going to be helpful. I wondered if what you were talking about was when the core meetings happen and the child protection meetings, that education were involved. I thought that's where you might be coming from, that it's all the multi-agency that are actually involved in those discussions, as what Damien was saying earlier, that you want them to be quick, but when there's a number of people involved, if it's, you know, if it goes on, it can be quite traumatic for people. But I think if that's what your question was, are education involved? I think they're a huge part of what the core meetings are about, because of course they see the children all through the day, every day, and are able to make determinations on that as well. I was just trying to be helpful, Chair.
Thank you, Cheryl. I think I'd be looking just to make sure that we were covering all aspects basically as much as anything else, to be honest. Can't see any other hands up. No other further questions, except to say thank you very much for the report.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we haven't had a discussion on the IROs and their function for some time, to be honest. So it's good to see it there, and it's something I must really remember for a couple of years' time again. I think we need to keep an eye on that. Okay, thank you very much. I think at that stage, that moves me on to item 9 on the agenda, which is the work programme. Our next meeting is going to be on the 24th of January, so we've got a bit of a break now, and then we will be looking at CAMS in particular, and support for carers and child disability service. And I think perhaps for that meeting, we ought to be inviting Councillor Mary Jones along, because she's heavily involved initially in the work on CAMS if you remember, and I think it's just as well to invite her. I think she would appreciate it, and she can make more contribution than most in that respect. And then we'll have the February meeting will be the budget one, so that's going to be interesting again, isn't it? Okay. On that point, I think I'll call a meeting to the close. If nobody's got any questions, anyway, colleagues, no. I'll thank you for attending, as it says, and told to tell you to thank you. But more importantly, I think it's really more important at this stage that I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, because we're not going to see this committee until next year now. So I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paxton.